Today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers on the Varsity Podcast Network is brought to you by Varsity Search. Varsity Search specializes in helping small law firms in Texas hire lawyers and build great teams. So if you're thinking of making a move or your law firm is looking to hire, please go to varsitysearch.com and book a time to visit right into my calendar. Varsity Search, building great teams. Hey everyone, Daniel here back with you on Lone Star Lawyers. I hope you and your family are both healthy and safe. Now, before we get into this episode, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the crisis we currently face in this country when it comes to race. Now, this week it was the senseless killing of George Floyd by a white Minneapolis police officer. Earlier this month, it was learning of the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery by two white men in Georgia, allegedly trying to make a citizen's arrest. And make no mistake, these are just the most recent examples of what has tragically and unacceptably become routine. We are human beings, created in the image of God and for his purposes. We are also all lawyers. Well, most of us, if we're listening to this, which means in addition to having a moral and a human responsibility to stand up against racism, against violence, we also have an obligation as officers of the court to ensure everyone is treated equally under the law, to uphold the values of our Constitution and the rule of law. In other words, to ensure justice. And in these most recent examples, as in so many others before them, we have failed. And yes, I say we, because while the individuals who carried out these acts are uniquely responsible, the problem runs much deeper than any one police officer or individual. It has infected our culture, and therefore we all bear some responsibility. So I want to implore each of us, and I'm talking to myself as much as anyone here, to take the time to look deep inside ourselves, to root out and repent of any hint of racism or bias that might exist in our own hearts, whether it be conscious or unconscious, and find a way within our own circle of influence, within our own sphere, to take action on behalf of our brothers and sisters who, like all of us, are image bearers of God. It is time to step up. And I'll be sharing more about this in future episodes and future weeks. But I wanted to say that for now and for today before we hopped into this episode. All right. Today, we are again in Houston, where Anna Greenberg is our guest. Anna is a personal injury attorney at Blizzard Law, where she specializes in mass tort pharmaceutical litigation and catastrophic injury claims, most extensively in truck accident cases. Now, we recorded this episode on April 9th, so do keep that in mind when we discuss some of the COVID-related matters. All right, with that, let's hop into our conversation with Anna Greenberg on today's Monday Mentors episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Anna Greenberg joins us right now. Anna, thanks so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to start off by just talking about how the coronavirus is impacting you and your firm and just everything that's kind of wrapped up in that. Let's start there. How are things going within the office and just with the work environment? How are the attorney staff kind of managing this situation?
So it's definitely impacted how we practice. It's affected everyone,
yeah.
You know. But we're continuing to work on our existing cases and meet our current deadlines. We're just doing so by working from home.
Yeah.
So it's affected our day-to-day interactions and kind of that in-person collaboration that's really helpful to have around the office. I can't just stick my head in Ed's office anymore and say, hey, what do you think about this idea? Or walk down the hall and talk to my paralegal and say, hey, what's going on with this? case or, issue. But we're managing, I think, pretty well. We hold Zoom calls, video conference meetings several times a week and just touch base with all the staff and all the attorneys
Yeah.
so that everyone makes sure that we're staying on track with our current deadlines and that we're meeting whatever issues people are facing head on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And from just kind of the client side, how have they reacted to all of this, and how has that impacted the way they communicate with you all? And just have you noticed changes in kind of their priorities, or just what's it been like working with your clients in these last couple of weeks?
Yeah, so a few of our clients have reached out to us to ask if this is going to impact their case in any way,
Yeah.
if it's going to delay their case. And luckily, so far, we haven't had any trouble continuing to litigate our current cases. So we can reassure them that we are still working on their case. We're still able to file things. We're still able to, request oral hearings via teleconference or video conference, or depositions via teleconference or video conference
Yeah.
if necessary. So we kind of just reassure them. And also we still take their calls. We have a really good call system that where our calls still come into our main office line, and then our secretary takes those calls and she can forward them to attorneys or paralegals, and we just answer those calls throughout the day and do our best to timely respond to our clients.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Obviously, other than having to work from a different location physically, that most of what you're able to do is able to continue, and your clients are able to continue to get service. And as we've said on here a couple of times, obviously the practice of law is, by all these orders, considered an essential service. So it's not anything that's being, a part of lockdowns or shelter in places, although a lot of law firms are operating remotely. And I know you were just talking about, Matt, like some are still having to use the office or going into the office
Exactly.
as well, sort of a combo approach.
Yeah. So my husband, Matt, is also an attorney, as you know. And, there's some things that he cannot get around in terms of needing to go to the office. Sometimes he just has to go to the office, whether it's to take a deposition via video conference because they have certain technology up at the office that they have to utilize for that, or accomplishing other tasks that you can't get around. You have to go in sometimes. And I even went to my office this morning because there were some books there that I needed.
Right.
So
Yeah.
sometimes you just got to go into the office.
That's right. Well, is there anything that you've learned in these last couple of weeks of either adapting to, whether it's the video conference technology or just operating from home, or just any tips or advice you might want to share with our audience in terms of what you've learned in these last few weeks?
Yeah, I think I have just learned that everyone has a lot of perseverance when it comes to the law. Whether it's other attorneys or staff, our staff has been so committed. And that's really great to see in times like these, when it definitely does put everything into perspective. Of course, everyone's health is the number one priority. And we have had staff members who have had family members affected by COVID-19. And that's what we're asking about a lot of the time when we communicate is, how are you? How is your family doing? Because, that is the most important thing. But it has been great to see that everyone is still showing up for our Zoom meetings and everything and still working, because the reality is we really do care about the work that we do, and we care about our clients. And you can really see that in how people have just really stepped up to the plate in these hard times.
That's awesome. And great to hear. Well, I do want to hear more about your firm and your practice. I'm familiar with it just from over the years of working with the firm in different ways. But many in our audience, especially not in the Houston area, may not know. So share with us a little bit about your firm, your specific practice, and kind of what you're working on these days. Let us in on what you guys have going on.
Okay. So Blizzard Law handles mass tort, pharmaceutical, and medical device litigation, as well as some individual personal injury cases and medical malpractice cases. So basically, we specialize in complex medical cases, which is what Ed, the partner, has done for so many years. So in terms of mass torts, we handle things like transvaginal mesh cases, the talcum powder litigation against Johnson & Johnson,
Right.
some IVC filter cases. And then in terms of some of the individual cases that I focus more on, we do have a handful of medical malpractice cases that are pretty severe. You have to be kind of picky in Texas with medical malpractice cases
Yeah.
because, as you know, a lot of people know they're capped
Yeah.
in terms of non-economic damages. So we have to screen very carefully with those cases that we do take. So the cases that we do have, people have been very seriously injured. And then we also are getting into some human trafficking cases and sexual assault cases. The human trafficking cases are against the hotel industry,
Okay.
major hotel brands across the U.S. that knew or should have known that they were participating in this trafficking at their hotels.
Yeah.
The rooms that were being rented and that they were profiting from. A lot of these young women were being trafficked there, and they knew about it, or they should have known, because there are a lot of glaring red flags, and they just kind of turned a blind eye. So that's a new area that we're getting into that's really exciting.
Yeah, no, that is, and I wasn't aware of that, so I'm glad you shared that with us. And with regards to whether it's some of the medical device stuff or even medical malpractice, like you're talking about, which is more rare in Texas these days, are there any either changes to the laws or just changes to the way that those types of cases are being prosecuted, whether that be through MDLs or other things, just things that are going on in the practice that you're paying attention to or that are shifting that people should be aware of?
I can't really think of any major recent shifts in terms of medical malpractice cases. You know, there's just a lot of statutory hurdles
Yeah.
that you have to clear in terms of the initial expert reports that you have to have on file 120 days after the defendant's answer. So you have to have your ducks in a row from the outset, because as soon as you file your case, you're going to have that clock start ticking as soon as they answer to basically prove up your case. And even though it's supposed to be a low bar on that initial expert report, defendants do a good job of trying to morph that into a motion for summary judgment, and they try to convince the courts that, you know, we haven't met our burden. And we have a really valuable case right now that we've been working on where the defendants raised this issue with our expert reports. They said it wasn't adequate, and the court disagreed with them and said, no, plaintiffs have the go-ahead to keep going, and you can't conduct any discovery until the court says that it's an adequate expert report. But then they appealed the trial court's finding, and so that stays the entire litigation until we get a ruling from the appellate court. So it's a really tough area of the law because it's such a good case, and we're ready to, you know, start deposing people.
Sure.
But you know, just because of the statutory hurdles that are in place in Texas makes it difficult for plaintiffs' lawyers.
Yeah, no question. No question about it. Well, and then I also wanted to give you an opportunity to either brag on Dad or share about what it's like to work in sort of a family business, if you want to call it that, and talk about that a little bit. And also just ways that you interact with other lawyers within the firm and out, just with the legacy that you have within the family.
Yeah, it's been really great, I have to say. There's a lot of trust there, obviously, because he's my dad, but beyond that, he is generally recognized as a pioneer in this area of the law. And he is so well respected, and for good reason. And I knew it before I worked for him, but getting to work with him and getting to see it, being with him in depositions, you know, we've tried a case now together.
Yeah,
he is
cool.
So talented, and he has really good instincts. And so I trust his judgment. And that's a lot when you're a younger lawyer and you're trying to learn good habits, good strategy when it comes to litigating cases and trial. It's so important to have a mentor that you can really trust, that to learn what they're doing is the right way.
Yeah.
And we totally have that, and it's great. We have a really good working relationship because I think he also has now a new respect for me and my ideas, and so we work really well together. And it's I think it's a special thing that we have.
Well, and I mean, it's a special thing to be able to do that. And I'm happy for you both and your family. It's really cool. And I should point out, and I mentioned it in the intro, that, and I think you may have just said that you only more recently started working directly with him and had gone and practiced in other places before this. So it's really neat to see. Well, one of the things I also want to have you speak to is, particularly with the young women in the audience, is just about how to go about practicing law in a civil law firm environment while also raising a family. You have a young child, and I know that that's been a balance that you've been working on, as all of us do that are parents, and we're trying to work, not just the women, but it impacts you more specifically and directly. So talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I would say that it's not without its challenges having a young child or having a family and being a practicing attorney, whether you're a man or a woman.
Yeah.
But I also want to communicate that it's really doable. You know, I had a really bad experience a few years ago with a legal recruiter who asked me to come and meet with her, and she was kind of asking me about my professional goals, my personal goals. And I told her that, you know, I was considering starting a family with my husband. And she said, oh, okay, well then, you know, you probably won't be a partner at any of the law firms. And that made me so angry that she was automatically,
wow,
you know, trying to determine my career and my future just because I said I wanted a family. And so I have not found that to be the case at all. Maybe that is some people's attitudes, but I feel that I am extremely effective and efficient in how I practice now because I want to get in the office, I want to get my work done, and I want to get home so I can see my daughter. When I'm in the office, 90% of the time my door is closed because I've got my head down and I'm working really hard.
Yeah.
And I don't, you know, swan around the office and socialize as much as I may have used to, but it's great. And it makes you really appreciative of the time that you do have away from your young child because you feel completely fulfilled and like a whole person and an intelligent person.
Yeah.
And then you're very appreciative of your time home with your child and you feel like a better parent. At least for me, that's how it's worked for me. So I've had a great experience so far with it.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. And thanks for sharing that. It's always good to get that encouragement, I think, for all of us who are trying to balance the raising the family with, leading successwant professional careers. And whether that's as a practicing lawyer or anything else, it's a challenge for sure. I want to also ask you about early lessons that you've learned as an attorney and what you would want to pass on to young lawyers listening right now. What's something that you learned as a young lawyer that has stuck with you and is part of who you are as a lawyer now going forward?
Well, one thing I learned early on was not to underestimate myself, that just because I was a young, inexperienced lawyer didn't mean that I couldn't be extremely valuable to the firm and to a mass tort litigation. I had a great boss, my first boss out of law school, who gave me a lot of opportunities. And when I started on, he hired me right out of law school. And as soon as I passed the bar, he said, look, I want you to get involved in this mass tort litigation. And I want you to be the person that knows the liability documents better than anybody else. And I said, okay. And so I, read everything. I immersed myself in it. And then he came back and he said, you did a really good job with that. So I want you to learn the science behind the causation as well and know it better than anybody. And I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And I did. And that really paid off because I became invaluable not only to the partner to educate him on the liability story and the causation issues, but to the whole plaintiff steering committee. And that earned me a seat at 2 different Rodney Jew sessions. And Rodney Jew is a trial strategist in Napa, California. And it's a very prestigious meeting. There's only a limited amount of lawyers that can attend. I think it's 5 lawyers per meeting. And I, as a young associate, got to 2 of those meetings because they all depended on me in terms of the documents and the science. And so I felt, honored to be there, but it also taught me, don't underestimate yourself. You can still be extremely valuable.
Yeah, that's great. What's maybe something that you've noticed in either, whether it be yourself or in new and younger lawyers that have come into the firms that you've been in over these last few years, things that are positive attributes that stand out to more senior lawyers and partners, and things that young lawyers can do to really get themselves on the right track from a professional development, career development standpoint?
I think, and this is kind of an obvious answer, but hard work always stands out to partners and other lawyers and staff too. Staff will immediately respect you as a young associate if you are working as hard or harder than they are, because staff work very hard.
Right.
And they don't want to see an attorney who's slacking, really. So I think hard work is the most important thing. You can make up for a lot of different things, weaknesses that you might have with hard work. So I think that's something that really stands out. Also, somebody that takes initiative, doesn't do just the bare minimum, somebody who will step up and say, hey, I have this good idea. That is also a great thing to have in a new associate, because you're ultimately looking for leaders. And so people who take initiative and can really effectuate change in the firm and make it better, that's something that's invaluable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually, I'm glad you said it. It's something that's come up a lot just in recent conversations that we've had here about this idea of being proactive. It's sort of beyond hard work, but it's more of the proactive, the ability to anticipate what might be coming down the pipe from whether it's a partner that's dishing out work or needing help in a certain case, but instead of waiting for it to come to you in your office, being the one to anticipate it and even get some of it on track to going before it's even asked of you. That's come up more recently quite a bit, and I think that's really good because I'm not sure it's intuitive necessarily for everyone. Even if they're hard workers, the proactivity and the ability to anticipate may not be necessarily intuitive to all of them.
No, I think that's a really good point, because the practice of law, some of it is using forms or doing the same thing over and over again, but a lot of it requires creative thinking.
Yeah,
and
right.
You really need associates and staff who can think creatively and come up, problem solve. And that's really important and something we look for in both our staff and attorneys.
Yeah. Well, as you've been able to participate either in screening resumes, looking at potential hires at the firms that you've been at, what have you either personally come to appreciate as important, or what have your firms really looked at hard in terms of things that are on the resume, things that are on the cover letters, to either put someone in the pile of, hey, we should really think about this person, versus maybe something on the other side of it that's, hey, they put this on the resume or did this or cover letter, and so we just won't even, that's a red flag, we won't even look at that or won't consider them any further?
Well, I don't think there's anything that you could put on your resume that would put you in the no pile automatically. But the asset in my mind that I'm always looking for, and it's maybe not necessarily on the resume, but maybe it could be accompanied with the resume, is a writing sample, because we are always looking for strong writers.
Yeah.
I feel that I am a strong writer, but even I doubt my own ability sometimes. And I think it's just so important in the practice of law to be able to be a good writer, good at taking depositions, have a diversity of talents. But writing is such a big component because there's motions, there's pleadings, And there's appellate issues that come up in just litigating an individual case that you need to be able to handle yourself. And I write a lot
Right.
at my current job. I spend a lot of time writing. We don't outsource any of our writing.
Yeah.
So that's always something I'm looking for with young lawyers is, have they come from a school where they really have a strong writing program, or is their resume accompanied by a writing sample that I think is really strong? Or have they taken elective courses about research and writing? So
Yeah.
that's something that I'm always looking for, because you can be a hard worker or you can have a really great GPA and have lots of lofty ideas about the law. But unless you have the nuts and bolts practical skills that come with research and writing, you can't really go very far.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, quick follow up to that, because I've worked with candidates before who, whether they were or not, believed they were strong writers. But oftentimes I feel like law firms, at least initially, don't ask for a writing sample. Some do, but a lot don't. Maybe just ask for a resume, maybe a resume and cover letter. And so what would your advice be to somebody who is looking at either a job posting or whatever that's asking for, a resume only or a resume cover letter, but that is a strong writer? We talk to them a lot about, you really need to follow the instructions of the job posting. So if it's asking you to do A, B, and C, do A, B, and C. But is there a way, an appropriate way to go ahead and add that, or ask to be able to add that writing sample as part of your application packet when it's maybe not explicitly asked for?
Sure. I think it's a great idea, if it's not explicitly asked for, to volunteer it, either in the body of your correspondence with the law firm and say, I'm happy to provide a writing sample upon your request.
Yeah.
Because I think it is really important. And maybe especially if the partners have delegated the hiring of new lawyers to somebody else who may not think about the importance of a writing sample. I think any partner who really knows what the associate's going to be handling would really like to see a writing sample. So even if it's not initially requested, I think it's a good idea to volunteer that.
Yeah. I think that's good advice. Is there anything that you've seen in interviews with candidates that stand out as positives, or things that might be seen as negatives from those in the room making decisions about hiring?
I think one thing that comes to mind is people that care about the work.
Yeah.
There are a lot of interviews that I'm thinking of just in the past several years where the young associate seems to be interviewing you, the firm. And then not the other way around.
Right.
Like, why should I come to work for you? And I think that type of arrogance is not the way to go in an interview. I think it's important to communicate that you have researched the firm that you are interviewing with, understand the type of work that they do, and communicate that you are interested in that type of work, and that you're passionate about it. That's what I'm looking for, is somebody that says, I want to be a personal injury lawyer. Or, I think I might want to be, because I've read about how you work with these human trafficking victims, and that really spoke to me, and I want to be involved and help them, because those people that actually really care about it are going to do better work. They're going to work longer hours, and their work product is ultimately going to be better because they care about what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting about about them interviewing you. And we talk a lot about the importance of having quality questions to ask in the interview on the candidate side, and what that might look like. Why should I come to work for you, or anything like it? It's not really on that list.
That's a negative.
Yeah, no, not so good. Something else, and this I think is timely relative to what we've kind of all adapted to here in the last few weeks. But in terms of the way that we work in the practice of law moving forward, and with the advent of more technology, more ability to work remotely, even artificial intelligence and whatever that might bring to the practice of law. What are you seeing in any of those areas that young lawyers ought to be paying attention to make sure they're sort of on the leading edge of all of that development and not falling behind within the practice?
I think definitely working with some sort of trial director program, which can be used in depositions or at trial, is important. Those programs, which you can display video and documents and transcripts either during a deposition or a trial, are expensive. And so if new lawyers don't have access to them through their firms, then they're not going to be able to use them
Right.
and get familiar with them. But I would request, if they are starting out at a litigation firm that does take a lot of depositions, does do a lot of trial work, I would request a tutorial on one of those programs, because it can be really effective if you can run trial director yourself in a deposition. You can pay a trial tech at a deposition to run it for you, but it's really expensive.
Yeah.
And so what Matt and I have both tried to do is to become proficient at operating the program ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's really helpful to have a working knowledge of it as well at trial, because if something goes wrong at trial, you can't rely 100% on a trial tech or anybody from your office to really fix any technology errors that are occurring. So it's important to have a working understanding, at least on some level, of the program that you're working with. So if things go wrong, that you can kind of handle it.
Yeah.
So that's the number one program that comes to mind for me that's been helpful. Honestly, Matt, my husband, is a lot more into the technology aspect of the practice of law. He's got his iPad, he's got his OneNote, he's got all these programs that he's really into. And I just keep plugging away on my Adobe, reviewing, documents and bookmarking and highlighting the old school way. But it works for me.
Yeah. Well, the last question I want to ask you about before we close with our rapid fire questions. Business development is something I get asked a lot about from young lawyers and how to go about doing that. I know it looks a lot different on the plaintiff side than it does maybe on a traditional either defense side or just corporate side, where you can take the chief legal officer out for drinks or golf or something like that and try to win corporate business. The plaintiff side's quite a bit different. But how would you advise a young lawyer when it comes to just developing those relationships that could potentially lead to clients or business or anything along those lines?
In terms of business development, I think networking can only get you so far. It's great to network. It's great to connect with other plaintiffs' lawyers and kind of have a presence in your legal community. I found that working in mass torts and getting to know other lawyers from across the country really helped me kind of move up on the radar in terms of the legal community in the mass tort world, which was great, but it doesn't necessarily bring in business because all the plaintiffs' lawyers are fighting for the same cases.
Sure.
So my advice would be to, and I'm trying to take my own advice here as well, is to familiarize yourself with the way to gather cases through the internet. There's a lot you can learn from working with the people that run your website. There's a lot of information about, Google ads, in order to either start your own business or really help your current firm. I think familiarizing yourself with getting cases that way, you could be an enormous asset.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, good. Well, I appreciate you so much taking the time. I know you're very busy, and I appreciate you hanging in with me over these last couple months and finding a time for us to do this. I really, it means a lot to me that you're taking the time to be with us. So thanks for that. If you are ready, we've got our rapid fire questions to end our time, and we can hop into that.
Okay, great.
Okay. So Name one trait or characteristic you most want to see in an associate.
I would say attention to detail.
All right. What habit has been key to your success?
Preparation or over preparation, as my husband would say.
Over preparation. Favorite app or productivity tool? We kind of covered the
Adobe. I don't have a good one.
No.
I'm sorry.
See, like 8 years ago, that would have been so cutting edge, right? Your favorite social distancing activity?
Playing with water balloons with my 2-year-old daughter.
Yes, water balloons. We have cracked those open as well. And then lastly, your favorite legal movie?
I think probably everyone says this, but A Few Good Men. I mean, I could watch that over and over and over again. I love that movie so much.
That's awesome. It is, I would say it and My Cousin Vinny are the two most popular answers. But there have been a sprinkling of a bunch of others as well. But no, it's definitely number one or number two. And it is my favorite on what we've ranked and reviewed so far. So good choice. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Anna, thanks again for being with us. Really appreciate you sharing your time. And best to you and your young family and Ed and the firm and just everybody. We hope everything goes well for you guys.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
All right, my thanks again to Anna Greenberg for joining us on the show today. If you enjoyed this episode, don't subscribe, don't rate or review the podcast in iTunes, don't do any of those things. Just do what I asked you to and what I asked of myself at the beginning of the show. Let's take some time. Let's reflect. Let's think. Let's not just let this pass by and get on to the next thing. Let's figure out what's going on inside of us and figure out how we can change to meet the challenge of this day. On behalf of all of our men and women and brothers and sisters, we have to do this. We have to do this. So that's a much heavier lift than what I normally ask of you at the end of each show, but I think it's warranted today. And so I hope that you will do that. All right. That's it for today's episode of Lone Star Lawyers. Thanks again so much to each of you for listening. I'm Daniel Hare with Varsity Search, and we will talk with you next time.